Once there's the question when we're learning Chumash Mos, when it came right before the 10th plague of Max Bechoros, Hashem says to Moshe Rabbeinu, Daven no bosnei om, please ask the people to borrow the personal effects of the Egyptians, Kli, Chesed, Pizov, the silver and golden vessels. And the Torah uses the term, Daven no, please ask of them. Why? So Rashi cites Chazal, Shlo Yoma Osa Tzadik, so the Tzadik shouldn't come with a claim, referring to Avram Avinu, that he had said to him, Avodim v'ina mosum kimehem, meaning the slavery, the bondage was fulfilled. But they leave him with great wealth that he hasn't accomplished. That hasn't been accomplished yet. Therefore, since I don't want Osa Tzadik, that Tzadik Avram, to come with this claim against me, please ask the people they should borrow from their masters the silver and gold vessels. So there's a question which is asked, if Hashem had promised Avram Avinu that after the bondage we're leaving with great wealth, that has nothing with Avram making a claim against him, please tell him to borrow so that their elders shouldn't come to me and say the first part of the dream was fulfilled, but the last part of leaving great wealth, that was not fulfilled. Hashem has to fulfill it because he said they would leave with great wealth. It has nothing to do with Osa Tzadik coming with a claim. That's the famous question which is asked. That's on Chazal. But we ask the question then, Chazal tell us that there were a number of junctures that the Jews became very wealthy. They became wealthy at the time Makas Dam, when the plague of the blood came, because the Egyptians, unless they paid for the blood, the water from the Jews, it did not remain water. Immediately, if it was water, it was converted to blood. So as a result of that, the Jews became phenomenally wealthy due to the Makas Dam, due to the plague of blood. So if that's the case, why is it so important that when they leave with this wealth, unless you say we had said that regardless of whatever level of wealth they had as a result of Makas Dam, the wealth that they left Egypt was beyond that. As it says, when they left, they didn't leave a morsel of wheat in Egypt. They stripped them of everything on the personal level. As it says that every Jew left with 10 donkeys laden with gold and silver. That's how much wealth they left. So that's the David Nod. That's Rechush Gadol. That's what we said. Not only that, there was Bizas Hayam, at the spoils of the sea were greater than the spoils of Egypt. So if that's the case, why is it so important they borrow? Ultimately, they can have wealth beyond their imagination, what it is. These were the questions we dealt with. So what we said then was that the Jews initially, when they came to Egypt, they were royalty. Yaakov and his family, Yosef was the viceroy. He literally dictated the world, and all of a sudden they would turn into slaves for all these years. They would turn into chattels. So what would be? So now it comes to the Makas Dam, the plague of the blood. They become phenomenally wealthy. But what is that? That wealth was basically extortion. It was extortion. The Egyptian had no choice but to pay for the water, because if it wouldn't pay for it, it remains blood. So the Jews, in terms of what they felt about themselves, who are we? Why are our masters giving us this money? It's like a person extorting someone for money. He has no choice. He has to give us money. But in terms of their status, their self-value, how they perceive themselves, we're a bunch of slaves. We're a bunch of gangsters. That's who we are. But at the end, before they left, it says, Vayitin Hashem Mitzrayim. All of a sudden, there was a special charm that the Jews had in the eyes of the Egyptians. When they came and they borrowed, the Egyptian felt he was honored that he was lending his slave his personal effects. It's unheard of. All of a sudden, the Jews came to a realization that if our masters value us and they pride themselves, and they feel privileged to be able to lend us, if that's the case, it restored that sense of self that we're royalty. And therefore, when they left Egypt, they left with glory. They didn't flee as fugitives from Egypt. Although they were told they were leaving at night, and Pharaoh wanted to chase them out, drive them out at nighttime, they did not go out till the morning. We'll leave when we're ready to leave. They left as masters, not as fugitive slaves fleeing from a master. This was the concept. So the Davnin Noah Ba'osnei Om please ask them. So the Loyomer Tzaddik, in terms of the actual value, wealth, they had wealth. But what Avram is going to come with a claim, but what are restoring their sense of self, their prestige, who they are, that has to be restored. As a result of that, they have to borrow the most valuable personal effects of their masters, and the master gives it happily, feeling privileged. That's a daben no bos ne'om, and that's why Shalom was tzaddik. In terms of the wealth, that was already fulfilled with the makav dam. But the other aspect of it, restoring their prestige, their honor, their sense of self, that didn't happen until they actually borrowed, and they saw the way the masters treated them, that they were the subjects and the slaves, they were the masters. That's what we said then. Okay? Now, in this week's parsha, we just read the Shabbos, the Torah speaks about if you have an Eved Ivri, a man or a woman, maximum they work for 6 years. A woman, her father sells her into slavery as a maidservant. A man, he sells himself, or he was sold by the Bezdin because he had stolen. He couldn't afford to repay the person he had stolen from. But it says, after he works for 6 years, it says, Hanek Tanagoso. You must give him, you must compensate him. You must give him a gift. You must give him a golden parachute when he leaves. Why? Because he was slaves in Egypt. Just as when you left Egypt, I gave you a gift for all the years of bondage. And what was the gift? Bizas Mitzrayim, Bizas Hayam. The spoils of Egypt and the spoils of the sea, that was the Hanukkah. That was the gift which you received. So similarly, when the person works for you for 6 years as your slave, when he leaves, he must leave with, you must give him a certain amount of money, different species of animals, whatever it is, that when he goes, he's been compensated. He feels that it's like you give him, it's more than just compensation. He feels you've restored his prestige, his honor. Because just as your honor was restored when you left Egypt, what was that? What was the honor you were given? The spoils of Egypt, the spoils of the sea. You must similarly compensate the slave to give him that sense, to give him the gift when he leaves. So we see that leaving Egypt was what? Is similar. That's similar when the slave, after he worked 6 years, you have to compensate him. That's what it's about. That the Bizas Hayam and the Bizas Mitzrayim. Now, firstly, it's difficult. So firstly, see this concept of what? It's Hanukkah. What's Hanukkah? The master gives the slave a golden parachute when he finishes work, when he finishes years of bondage or work, whatever it may be. So we see it's restoring his sense of who he is. He's not just a slave. A slave, you let him go, and you have no concern. You're not concerned about his welfare. Torah says, no, just as when you left Egypt, you received Hanukkah, which was the spoils of the sea, the spoils of Egypt, spoils of sea, you're receiving this. You must compensate your slave. So you see this concept over here that it's not just the money, it's valuing, because it's called Hanukkah. Rashi, what's Hanukkah? It's like an ornament. You're ornamenting the person after working, give him that sense of value. So we had a sense of value. Makas Dam didn't give us that sense of value. Man had a tremendous amount of wealth, but who are we? We're still a bunch of slaves who extorted our masters for that amount of money. So we have wealth, but that was never restored. That's what you see. Also, he says, what was that? Hanukkah? Bizas Hayam. The Biza, the spoils of the sea, the spoils of the sea, says explicitly, were given to us to build the Mishkan. But we didn't know, when we received the spoils of the sea, the reason why it's true, Hashem gave it to us to build the Mishkan. But when we received it at that time, our masters, we saw their remains. All the wealth of Egypt was thrown on the seashore, and we could take as much as we wanted, and it was even more than the spoils of Egypt. When we gave the wealth for the Mishkan, that was we gave the wealth. Hashem gave it to us so we should be able to give it, but factually it was ours. So again, that was brought us to another level. Not only did we take the spoils of the individuals, of the populace who were our masters, this was the wealth of Egypt. This was the wealth that Yosef had stored away. This was the government wealth. The individual, we took everything. and that's why they pursued us. But in addition, Hashem gave us even the wealth of the government, which were the chariots were bedecked with all the gold and silver and the diamonds. That's what we received at the sea. So in terms of where we would put what we felt, we put on a pedestal which is not to be believed. That's the concept of Hanukkah. Prophet comes, and there's a false prophet that you put him to death. And he comes and he proves that he's a prophet, because as the Rambam rules, Paskins in Yisrael Torah, how does a prophet prove he's a prophet? He has to perform a revealed miracle, and he has to forecast the future. And the person does. And all of a sudden he tells you, his communication was you should go to idolatry. Okay? So that's a false prophet. You put him to death. So the Torah says, what is Hashem doing? Why is he allowing to perform these revealed miracles? He's testing you to see whether you love Hashem who took you out of Egypt. Those are the words of the Torah. He's Manasseh Eskem Hashem who took you out of Egypt. He's testing your love. Do you love Hashem? He's testing you whether you love Hashem who took you out of Egypt. What does that have to do with love? He's testing your love. I mean, the man performs miracles. He splits the sea, splits the Atlantic Ocean straight across. A person doesn't have legs, and all of a sudden he has legs and he's able to walk. He's paraplegic. If you believe him that God told to do idolatry, which is contrary to what we heard at Sinai, he's testing whether you love Hashem. What does it do with loving Hashem, not loving Hashem? That was my question. He's testing you whether you believe in him or not. What does that do with whether you love him or don't love him? Read in Pirkei Avos, the two types of love. There's Ava Tluya B'Dover, Ava She'eino Tluya B'Dover. There's a love which is contingent on something, and there's love which is not contingent on anything. What does that mean? It says, Ava Tluya B'Dover, Batul Dover Batla Ava. If the Ava is based on something, once that something no longer exists, the love is over. But if the love is not based on anything, but rather recognizing who that person is, so then that love is all enduring. That's what it is. And the Mishnah gives an example. If the love is based on beauty, once the beauty goes, the love is gone. But if the love is based upon understanding and recognizing who that person is, that will not change. Because if the person is that, that's what that's called Yiras HaRomamus. It's recognizing the awesomeness of that particular person or entity, and if you recognize that, nothing else exists. That's Ava She'eino Tluya B'Dover. If you recognize who God is, it's not because he gives you anything, because he treats you well or kindly, or he protects you. It has nothing to do with this. It has nothing to do with the recipient, but rather the person recognizes who God is. As the Rambam says, there's a mitzvah of Avas Hashem. How can Hashem give a mitzvah that you must love? Love is an emotion. Either you love or you don't love. How can he command you to love? You have an obligation to love God at all levels. Love is what you feel. So how can he tell you what to feel if you don't feel this way? So Rambam explains that if you believe in God and you look at the world and you see how unending and the magnificence and the unending ability of God, that he's infinite, you become negated. And the moment you become negated, immediately, and you recognize who he is, you want immediately, it evokes a level of love that you want to be attached and associated and identify with this entity. So the whole understanding is what blocks us. We have self-love. We love ourselves. So whenever we feel that loving anybody else but ourselves, that's infringement on ourselves. But the moment you're negated and you don't exist, because you're so overwhelmed and so awestruck by Hashem, automatically that'll evoke a love because you want to be attached and associated with this entity who's known as the creator. That's the Rambam in Hilchot Yisrael Torah. Said it's Ava She'eino Tluya B'Dover. It's because I recognize who you are. If you recognize who Hashem is, it's irrelevant what you do. You split the sea, you perform miracles. But I recognize God for who he is, Once that happens, nothing means anybody. everything means nothing. But if it's because what you're going to be a recipient, you're going to be a beneficiary, then already it's not so simple. Maybe this guy's going to deliver what God didn't deliver. If you look at it based on you being the beneficiary, the recipient, then we have a challenge over here. You're pitting one against the other. Maybe it's the idolatry. The idolatry will provide something. But if you understand who God is, there's no competition over here. Because it's not me, it's not the recipient, but it's who do I believe in? I believe in a being which is awesome at a level that there's nothing comparable to him because he's infinite. And everything else is finite, therefore it's not even a challenge. And therefore it's not a test. So Hashem is testing your love. The love is the recognition of who he is. As the Rambam says in Hilchos Yesodei Torah. That's the understanding. Judges and law enforcers, you put in place in all your communities, which Hashem is giving to all your tribes, and they will adjudicate the people verdict which is righteous. Rashi, Shoftim v'shotrim, Shoftim Dayona poskim sadim. Shoftim are the judges which rendered the verdict. V'shotrim harod nisom ach mitzvosom, and the law enforcers, they direct the people to follow the dictate of the court. Whatever the court rules, a law on the books means nothing unless it's enforced. So the law enforcers make sure that the laws which are rendered by the court are enforced. Even if it means physical, they have to use a whip or a makel, a cane, as din hashofet, until they accept the judgment of the court. Every community has to have a bezdin, and lawful lishvatecho. Most of al titin loch shotim titim chosherecho b'chosherecha asher shem nosim. Okay, lishvatecho. Lamed shemoshivin dayono choshev shevet choliv. Every shevet has its own like Sanhedrin, so to say, and every community has a bezdin. What is it speaking about? So the Gemara explains. There's a question. If you have a community as few as 120 people, you have to have a bezdin. What's a bezdin? We have three types of botik dinim. You have a bezdin of 3 people, you have a bezdin of 23, and you have a bezdin of 71. A bezdin of 23 is called Sanhedrin Ketana. A Sanhedrin of 71 is Sanhedrin Gedola. That's the High Court of Israel. High Court. A court of less than 23, and they have to be mumchim, they have to be ordained by Moshe Rabbeinu. They could issue verdicts of the death penalty, physical, corporal punishment, and penalties. If a bezdin is not ordained by Moshe Rabbeinu, all they could do is adjudicate monetary laws. Chnas, Malkos, and Mises Bezdin cannot be rendered. Those judgments cannot be. You need a bezdin of 23, and they have to be mumchim. They have to be smuchim. They have to receive the ordination of Moshe Rabbeinu. That means every community, there's machlokes, is it 120 people, 240 people, has to have a bezdin of 23. And in addition to the bezdin of 23, to render these verdicts of death penalty, corporal punishment, and penalty, and on top of that, you have law enforcers, a law enforcement system, that the judgment is going to be carried out. Now, if a person eats a gazayis of nevela, which is not much, the volume of an olive of non-kosher meat, and he's forewarned, what is he subject to? He's subject to Malchus. What's Malchus? So Gemara tells us in Malchus and Sanhedrin that he's first evaluated. Malchus maximum is 39 lashes. But he needs an evaluation by a doctor to see whether how many lashes he's able to withstand. Because if he dies under the whip, because it says after he sees the Malchus, he's called your brother. That means he remains alive. But if he's nigh under the whip, then you don't give him that number. So he's evaluated how many lashes could he take. Could you imagine a person getting whipped 20 lashes? The man is laid up for 2 years. He's put out of commission. Is it worth it? You're forewarned, and you're told by the aided who forewarned you, you realize you eat that, there's gonna be a consequence here. It's not worth it. And he says, I'll do it in either case. Which man in his right mind is gonna say, I'll do it in either case? It's not gonna do it. Understanding the liability, the death penalty, malchus, or penalty, financial penalty that you have to pay, it's not worth it. And every town, every village that has 120 people, you have to have this system in place. How do we differentiate between a human being and a living creature? Is your behavior dictated by instinct or is it by choice? Let me ask you, does Hashem leave you much choice? He gives you no wiggle room here. Anybody who has any degree of being rational is not going to cross that line. So if that's the case, here he gives us bechira to choose, make the right decision, where actually he's not giving us much choice. We're forced to make the right decision. So how much is attributed to us? How much is attributed to God himself? But yet that's the system Hashem says has to be in place. Every village has 120 people, 240 people, whatever, has to have a Sanhedrin Gedolah, a Sanhedrin Ketana, Sanhedrin of 23 people of the special level of nation. That's the question we asked in the past. That a human being has within his ability. A human being basically, in his essence, is what, even though we have a neshama, but our physicality is literally animalistic. And there's always that struggle between the neshama, the spiritual, and he's a composite. A person has the ability to go to the most extreme level of depravity, to be a predator animal, to kill, to murder, to rape, to be in violation of everything under the sun. You have that within you, your capacity. Hashem says, but for my children, because which we just read last week, that's for them, that's not for you. The Medrash asks a question. The nations of the world, they do everything under the sun. They murder, they rape, they commit every incestuous violation. They steal, they damage, and Hashem doesn't rein in on them. And we step out of line a little bit, right away Hashem comes down hard on us. Why? The Medrash asks this. Hashem says, that's for them, that's not for my children. My child, your princes, it's a different level of behavior. It's not for my children. So Hashem says, the playing field for my children is, of course, it's within, because it is within your capacity. I don't even want you to go near that. Because since Losis go to do, you can't lacerate yourself to express your grief over somebody dies. That's the way they do it. That's not for you. That's unacceptable. So Hashem is setting a standard for us. So what is Bechira? How does Bechira for a Jew manifest itself? You know how it manifests itself? You do the right thing. Do you do it Lishma? Do you do it Shalom Lishma? And even when you do Lishma, is it Yiras Aromus or is it Yiras Onish? Is it a fear of punishment or it's because of awe? And even if you reach that level, is it Avos Hashem or it's less than Avos Hashem? Those are the parameters which Hashem is putting us to. But it's never a question that you're submerging yourself, you're going under the water. No way. I'm not going to let you go near that. Because your Bechira manifests itself, it's a different qualitative level of existence, the Jew. He says, I don't want you to be a question whether you're going to eat non-kosher or not. Torah says to eat non-kosher, it actually shuts your spiritual system down. I don't want you going there that. It's like drugs. Drugs are not for my children. The world has drugs, and the son comes to the father and says, there's no way you're going even near that. I'm not going to let you be associated with those kinds of people. Because that's not for you. You want to be associated, eat kosher only, even though you're exposed to people who are gluttons, which is lacking in avodas Hashem, because you have your head in the feed bag rather than eating for the sake of Hashem, the Shem Shemaim. Okay, that's a different story. That should be your challenge, but it should never be a challenge to eat not kosher species. That's not part of your challenge. Because we need time to, because that's going to shut your systems down. Your systems have to be functioning. With the functioning system, you have enough challenges to deal with. Do you do it with the Shem Shemayim? Don't do you do it with the Shem Shemayim? Those are the parameters of a Jew's Bechira. It concludes, and they will adjudicate the people Mishpat Tzedek. What's that Mishpat Tzedek? Rashi. Banei Dayonim Mumchim. Firstly, the Dayonim have to be experts, fully proficient in this area. Mumchim v'tzadikim. It's not enough to be proficient. They have to be righteous. Lishbot Tzedek. Because unless you have these two components, then mumchim and tzadikim, the verdict is not going to be a just verdict. There has to be mishpat tzedek. And that's where it all began. Who's the judge? I mean, right after this, it speaks about Lositucha Ashero. Should not plant should not plant this idolatrous tree. So the Gemara says in Sanhedrin that if you appoint a judge that's not qualified, it's like planting an Asherah, this idolatrous tree, in the sanctuary. It's to that degree. It upends Klal Yisrael. The whole concept of having a relation with Hashem is actually terminated because of this. If it's not Mishpat Tzedek. We had said in the past, we quoted a Medrash, Gemara, that the Gemara says that if a judge is corrupt, Hashem says, I will take your soul. The liability for the corrupt judges, Hashem says, I will take you out. Even for a cent. But yet a person could be a thief and he could steal endless money. Hashem doesn't say the liabilities are going to take you out. So Gemara says, if that's the case, if a judge renders a verdict which is not exactly correct, his life's in jeopardy. Who's going to want to be a judge? So the Gemara says, as long as the Dayan is qualified and he's judging, his judgment is based upon the way he's evaluating the evidence, and he wants to give a correct judgment, he has nothing to be concerned about. And therefore, a Dayan, when he sits on the bench to render a judgment, he should see himself like he has a double-edged sword between his legs, and if he makes one wrong move, he gets cut in half. That's how he has to see the seriousness of his judgment. And if you see that and you're proficient in the laws, you can render a correct justice. You may make a mistake. Nothing's beyond human error. But at least qualification, you qualified, and you have the level of integrity that you're going to render the right judgment. But if you actually fail in integrity, then I will take you out. Person steals, has nothing, he's not a judge. So we asked, why does the judge have greater liability than a person who violates the Torah? Even more than a person who violates Shabbos. So we mentioned, just to end with this, initially HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted to create the world with Midas Hadin, with the attribute of judgment. Why did he not? Because he saw the world would not survive it. Divine judgment is so exacting, and man is prone to fail. If the attribute judgment would be in place, the world would be destroyed. So what did Hashem do? He coalesced Midas Arachmim. But factually, we have to have justice. Because if mankind is not held accountable for their behavior, the world cannot function. You have to have justice. So what did Hashem do? Instead of divine justice, there's human justice. The courts. What about if the courts become corrupt? And you don't even have human justice. On the terrestrial level, there's no human justice. So this is the measure. If there's justice on the terrestrial level, Hashem says there's no divine justice. There's no need for divine justice. But if there's ein din lamata, if the terrestrial justice is corrupt, then the world has to have justice. Then there's justice, there's divine. Once there's divine justice, the world is going to suffer very seriously. And who's at fault? The judge who's corrupt. The corrupted judge, he has the liability Because for him not meeting the standard of what a just verdict is, he actually brought about divine justice on the world. Therefore, Hashem says, if you're going to be corrupt, even for a penny, meaning that means there's no justice on terrestrial level, you're the one who's activating the divine justice. So all the suffering in the world is due to what? You failing on your watch. Quotes of Elokim Nitza B'Daskeel. It's supposed to continue. Whenever a court meets, a qualified court meets, God convenes with that business, with that court. Meaning, even if they make a mistake, we discussed the case of conspiring witnesses. Witnesses testify a person committed murder or deserves to be put to death, he's put to death. After they put him to death, they find out that the witnesses were conspiring. That means it's safe. An innocent man was put to death. He may have been innocent for the crime that he was found guilty for, but the reason why he's put to death is because God wanted to be put to death. Because if Hashem convenes with every Bezdin, that means the court is seeing it through God's eyes. God wanted that man to be put to death. So there's no culpability for the Bezdin. As long as they followed the protocol which was prescribed by the Torah, that judgment is a correct judgment. It may not be for Shabbos, maybe something else, whatever it is, only God knows. But there's none. So that's what we're talking about over here. A person, the one who's the victim, the one who's the victimizer, inadvertent. The person throws a stone and kills a person, whatever it may be. The person who was killed, evidently, it was meant for him to die. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been killed. And the one who threw the stone, he also has liability. Because why is God having him to be the one to take out the other guy, the other person? Okay, we're going to continue this tomorrow.